Welcome to another series of financial indicators by Fahad M. Gohar. This is going to be the video number 7. Today's subject will be the CPI, which stands for Consumer Price Index. What it does, it compares actually the consumer price index between 2 years, which is, for example, the current month, let's say it's October, versus the same month last year. That's what it does. So CPI measure actually what we call it, the price at the end user level, which is the consumer, while there is the PPI, which measure the price the producer pay for, as for example a sale outlet to the wholesaler, which is a different issue. Now let's talk about the groups that consist of the consumer price index. The groups are, of course, housing, apparel, transportation, education and communication, other goods and services, recreation, medical, and food and beverages. Those are the 8 major groups of consumer price index. Now, there are types of CPI. Of course, not one type. Of course, what it does, that there are what we call it the headline CPI, which track all prices regardless, which include also the food and energy prices. And the other tab, we call it the core CPI, and that one tracks all the previous one, except it does not include food and energy. It strips out food and energy from the calculation. Okay, now how to measure that CPI? There are steps to do to measure it. First you have to collect the price data, which means you obtain price data for a representative basket of goods, of course, and services for both years, the previous year and the current year of the same month. This basket include items like food, housing, transportation, medical care, and other common expenditure. Second, you determine the weight. How you do that? You assign weight to each of those categories you just collected of goods and services based on their relative importance in the average consumer budget. The weight typically remains stable over a short period, but may be, of course, adjusted to reflect changes in consumer pattern. Example, it's now a cold weather. The coal or the energy, for example, will have a higher weight to it than if it is like in the summer. So you adjust the weight accordingly. Okay. Now, third one you calculate the price index for each year, and for each year you multiply the price of each item in that basket you just have collected, and what you do then by its corresponding weight, and then you sum up those weight prices to get the overall price level for the basket in each year. Of course, I'm going to give you now a simple example so you can understand the concept behind it. For example, which is what we call it the annual CPI formula. This formula consists, as you can see, value of basket in the current year that you have collected. Remember, you collect the price data, you divide it by the value of the basket in prior year. Okay, and then of course you multiply by 100 to get a percentage. That's obvious. And now I will give you a true example. Let's assume the CPI for 2024. Total price level level in 2024, you divide it by the total price level in 2023, you multiply that by 100. Okay, example here, let's look for this one here. Price index for the year, for that basket, year 2, of course, you know, it was 7.2, the price of that basket. Remember, you give a weight for each, you know, parts within that basket, and then they came up, you know, to that price we're talking about. You divide it by the previous year, same month of course, you multiply by 100, it's 120. What does it mean 120? Anything above 100, that's the one that you are looking for. The CPI here for year 2 is 120, which what? Indicate that there has been an inflation. How much that inflation is? The 20%, the above 100. That's of course an inflation increase in the overall price level of the basket of goods from year 1 to year 2. So when you talk to somebody, you can say, okay, we have an inflation about what? 100. You're not gonna say 120%. You're gonna say 20%. Anything above 100, that's the inflation. Okay. Now let's interpret, you know, the CPI level and what it means exactly, you know, because that's very important to understand it, and it's easy actually. It's not that difficult, you know. So first of all, let's put the chart together. We have levels. Okay. First level would be 2%. Then we have 4%, and then we have 10%. So if it is around, you know, 2%, it's considered acceptable and unreasonable CPI. This is often considered the target inflation rate by many central banks, including, of course, the Federal Reserve in the United States and the Europe Central Bank. A 2%, of course, inflation rate is seen as a sign of healthy economy, where prices, you know, are rising steadily, allowing for economic growth without eroding purchasing power too quickly. And now let's see when it is around 4% or above 4%, what we call it. At that moment, we have a concerning or alarming CPI inflation rate. You know, when the CPI exceeds 4%, it may start to cause concern. It suggests, you know, that prices are rising faster than what most wages can keep up with, which will do what? Will lead to a decrease of the purchasing power and potential economic instability, because people, you know, the money will not be able to buy everything you want. You know, the dollar or the dirham or the real or the euro that you used to buy, for example, some commodity, now you have to double it in order to buy the same commodity at the same size. So that's the dangers of it. Now, when it is 10% here, which is above 10%, now we are entering a new era or a new region. We call it hyperinflation. You know, inflation rate that reaches double digits are considered very alarming. This level of inflation can erode, of course, saving, because people will lose a lot of their money because they have to pay way too much for anything they want, goods and services, destabilize economy, and leads, of course, to a loss of confidence in the currency. It's often associated with severe economic crisis. It's very dangerous. The worst of all, if you have a CPI that's negative per year, that's we call it deflation. Prices are falling. While, you know, not related to a high CPI, it's worth noting that a negative CPI or a deflation can also be alarming. It indicates falling prices, which might sound good, you know, at the beginning, but will lead what? To reduce consumer spending, you know, because the prices are falling now. You know, lower profit for businesses. Businesses cannot expand, you know, because they are getting less for their goods and services. And this will be a vicious cycle of economic downturn. So we have to be very careful. So here the issue, you know, we want it to be always around 2%, you know, to be acceptable and reasonable. Above 4%, the alarm has, you know, start ticking, but above 10%, double digit, that's very alarming. The same also if it is negative. So now this is just a chart that show you the CPI, the two types, which is you have the, you know, the headline CPI and the core CPI, which the core means it strips out foods and energy, and you can just see, you know, they almost, you know, they don't flow together. You can see the CPI here, you know, and then the core, you know, goes up. That's year by year, just a way for you to understand. So I hope this was interesting subject for you to learn, and I will see you in the next video.